Good afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In continuation with the series on religion and society, in today's lecture we are going to discuss on Sikhism. In last lecture we talked about the rituals of left hand and right hand. So basically this reading is prescribed in the syllabus for BA Multidisciplinary second semester, and this is part of unit 2 where the discussion is on different types of rituals and significance of rituals in different religion. Today we are going to understand Sikhism as a religion and understand the 5 symbols of Sikhism. For the discussion today we are going to refer to JPS Uberoi's article titled 5 Symbols of Sikhism. So let us understand Uberoi's understanding of Sikhism as a religion. JPS Uberoi study of the 5 symbol of Sikhism, that is the 5 Ks, interprets them as a structural symbolic system rather than merely religious markers. So we kind of in sociology move away from understanding religion as only structural to the understanding of religion as part of the culture. Here we see that Uberoi analyzes the symbols, that is the 5 Ks, which is significant in Sikhism, through structural semiological method to understand the deep underlying meaning rather than just the historical origin. So again, in terms of theoretical stance, we see that much of the understanding of rituals takes us back to the origin, to the historical mythology associated with it. Here is a study which is looking into the everyday empirical understanding of rituals. So Uberoi argues that these symbols reconcile opposing forces, that is nature and culture, the warrior and the saint, the spiritual versus the temporal concern, solidifying the Sikh identity, which integrates the householder lifestyle with a commitment to faith. Here again we see a significant theoretical contribution by Professor JPS Uberoi, where much of the understanding of religion begins with a opposition for dichotomies like nature versus culture, religion versus secular, and therefore we see another dichotomy which is very significant in Hinduism is the opposition between everyday householder versus a ascetic or a sannyasi, and he argues that this is one particular faith where there is an integration of the householder and the ascetic. When we look into the methodology that JPS Uberoi uses for the study of Sikhism, he applies a structural method to explain the 5 Ks of Sikhism. Rather than viewing them as mere historical relics, he treats them as sophisticated language of identity that redefined the social and religious landscape of Sikhism. Let us understand what are the 5 Ks or what are the 5 symbols which are significant in Sikhism. First is Kesh. It's K because all 5 start with a K, which in English could be translated unshorn hair. Then we have the Kanga, which is the comb, the Kara, which is the steel bangle, and Kacha, which is the undergarment. And the 5th is Kirpan or the dagger, which is significant for all Sikhs to carry it. These 5 Ks reflect a structural inversion of Hindu ascetic renunciation, promoting worldly engagement over withdrawal. So when we look into Hindu asceticism, it is an otherworldly asceticism where you kind of give up your everyday worldly life and become an ascetic. Here is an explanation where you can be a part of your everyday mundane life and yet kind of be close to asceticism. So instead of looking at the hair, that is the kesh, in isolation, the structural method looks at number 1, the opposition. So in the Indian context, shaving always symbolizes a worldly life, while matted hair, like a sannyasi, symbolized renunciation of the world. So, we make a dichotomy or an opposition between, say, neat and clean, tidy hair, and you kind of shave yourself if you are going for an office or a formal party, and the complete opposition is unkept hair or long hair of a sannyasi. So, these opposition would get kind of paired up when we look into case as an important symbol in Sikhism. When we look into the structural method, we also look into the synthesis. This Sikh, unshorn but combed head and tied, represents a third way. So, one is an unkept hair, the other is a tidy kept hair. This is a third way, which is a long hair, but it is tidily kept, and it kind of gives us a confluence of the household and the scent. Uberoi rejects both the ascetic withdrawal and the worldly person's vanity. Let us look at the advantage of the structuralist method. The use of structuralist analysis of Sikh identity has certain advantages. Number one, it highlights a compelling paradox. And the question that arises is, how does a faith that is doctrinally anti-ritualistic come to be defined by such specific mandatory physical symbol? So, at one level, Sikhism is considered as an anti-ritualistic, but at a certain level, you have such strict norms and rules regarding these 5 symbols. Uberoi suggests that by applying a comparative and an empirical method, we can understand why the case or the unshorn hair is so central to the Sikh. This framework positions Sikhism as anti-ritualistic yet symbolically rich, illuminating religion's role in identity formation and social structure. So, he says basically to understand Sikhism's anti-ritualistic framework, it is very important for us to kind of apply 2 interrelated aspects. And these aspects will see what is the level of analysis and the question being asked. So, the first aspect is an ideological meaning. The level of analysis is culturally conditioned thought. And what are the questions being asked? The questions are, what does this symbol say? The symbol as a condensed statement of values. The second level of analytical understanding is the social function. In the social function, the level of analysis is basically your institutionalized behavior, and the questions asked are, what does this symbol do? How does it relate the individual to the group and the wider social system? So, 2 level of understanding, that is one at the ideological level, which will help us to understand the idea, why do we need a symbol? And the second will explain the function of the symbol, or why the individuals are kind of institutionalizing this behavior, in the sense that how will the individuals' acceptance of the symbol help them connect to the collective. So, first we have understood that it is understanding of these symbols in Sikhism. We understood the structural method and its advantage. Now, let us understand the core pillars of Sikh identity. J.P. Uberoi's central thesis is that the Sikh initiation is a structural inversion of the Hindu sannyasi or the renunciation of yogi rituals. The initiation ceremony, which is basically a ceremony to initiate an individual into the Sikh community, it is also known as Amrit Sanskar, and it is held when a Sikh becomes part of the Khalsa. This involves 2 major set of rules. Number 1, the 4 kuras or the major taboos. These are the 4 prohibitions a Sikh must never violate. Cutting hair is often listed as the foremost taboo. And the second part of the Sikh Khalsa is the 5K or Panch Kakkar, the 5 physical symbols that serve as a uniform for the faithful. So, if you are a true Sikh and you believe in your faith, then you must carry all the 5 Ks, as representation of your Sikh identity. So, let us look at the 5 Sikh Ks which are significant, which J.P.S. Uberoi is understanding to help us understand Sikhism from a sociological lens. The first is case, which we already understood, is the unshorn hair. And what is the symbolic meaning? It reflects holiness, strength and acceptance of God's will. The second is kanga, or the wooden comb. It represents cleanliness and discipline, keeping the hair tidy. So, you need to keep long hair, but it should be kept tidy, and that is symbolically meaning that you need to take care of your health and hygiene. The third is the kara, or the iron bracelet, and the symbolic meaning is restraint, gentleness and a link to the Guru. So, though you have a metal in your body, you are not going to use it for violence, you are just going to use it as something which is constraining you, something which is holding you back. The fourth is the kachera, or the cotton undergarments, which symbolize self-control and chastity. The fifth is kirpan, or the steel sword. It reflects struggle against injustice and protection of the weak. So, you are going to not only maintain a uniform and a disciplined life, but you are also going to protect your community members. So, when we look into these 5 Ks and we try to understand the significance, we see that he is trying to have a look at not only the hair. So, it is not kind of looking only one element, but we need to look at the other context of other rites. So, in structuralism, meaning is derived from relationship. For example, the hair or the case gains its specific Sikh meaning only when paired with the comb or the kanga. Without the comb, the hair might signify a wild ascetic or a sadhu. With the comb, it signifies a disciplined member of society. So, basically he is talking about these 5 symbols and kind of makes them into pair, and the two have meaning only in relations to each other. So, one would kind of reflect the structureless, while the second half will bring about a structure to the situation. So, the second pair here is the kirpan, which is the sword, and the kara, which is the steel bracelet. So, the kirpan represents the attribute of the king or Rajya, the power of the sword and the duty to protect the weak. The kara is worn on the same hand that wields the sword. The iron bracelet serves as a physical and a symbolic check. So, basically there is a kind of the duality that you have a weapon, which is your kirpan, but that kirpan is symbolic only for the protection of the community. And how are you going to control it? Because you are going to look into the kara, which is kind of binding you, and you will not misuse the power of the sword for your individual vested interest. So, this pair of the kirpan and the kara signifies power constrained by allegiance. The sword is not for personal aggression, it is locked by the bracelet, reminding the Sikh that their strength belongs to the Guru and must follow a moral code which would reflect the interest of the collective and not the vested interest of the individual. Now, we come to the third binary pair, which is the kachera and the unstated. Now, the kachera or the cotton undergarments are functional sword breeches that allow for quick movement and riding. Uberoi contrasts the kachera with two extremes. Number one is the nakedness or loincloth of the celibate monk and unconstrained dress of the worldly person. This signifies sexual continence in an active life. It rejects the idea that a religious person must be a celibate monk. Instead, it affirms that the role of the grihast or the household who is sexually disciplined but lives a life of labor and family. So, we have looked into the 5 binaries, though they are the 5 symbols, but he is pairing it with unstated in the sense that it in itself reflects the duality. Now, let us understand the significance of the 5 Ks. Now, these 5Ks are not just religious obligations, they are a sophisticated coding of the human body. By wearing this pair, a Sikh resolves the ancient Indian tension between the world of power, the world of the spirit, and the world of the home. So, it's kind of not bringing us into two divided domains of the power and the home, or the religious and the secular, rather, it's finding a mid path. So, by wearing these pairs together, the Sikh refuses to be partitioned. They do not have a choose between being a monk, a soldier, or a farmer. They are all three at once. This is what Uberoi calls the unity of man's estate. Let us now look into the three yogas which these pairs will help us transcend. The yogas or disciplines which is kind of part of the traditional society prior to the coming of the Sikhism. So, the first yoga is the sannyas yoga or the spirit, and it's also known as the yoga of renunciation. This was marked by either a shorn head, the sannyas, or meated, wild hair, the jogi. In Sikhism, the pair of the case and the kanga symbolizes the coexistence of both. You have the holiness of the saint, that is your case, but you keep it tidy and social with the help of your kanga. So, you don't have to leave society to be holy, and that is that religious can coexist with the secular. The second yoga or the discipline is Raj Yoga. It means the state or power. In medieval India, the yoga of the state or kingship was reserved for rules. It was the world of violence and political command. Power is never wild of a personal ego. The kara acts as a permanent reminder that the sword must only be drawn for justice and under a moral code. So, this pair of the kara and the kirpan basically reduces the misuse of the weapon. And the third discipline or yoga is the grihastha yoga, which is the household or the labor. The yoga of the household was often seen as spiritually lesser than a life of a monk. So, basically there was a duality between being a householder and being a saint, and the saint had to undergo a lot of hardship or kind of had to completely cut off from the household to become an ascetic. Now, there is a kind of a complete duality between the two, which Uberoi is trying to say that it gets mitigated when we look into the Sikhism. So, the household and the ascetic duality was associated with the desire of the body and the weight of the worldly labor. So, here the third binary, which is the kachera and the unstated part, will help us to understand that the kachera is a garment of active continence. It is functional for a soldier or a laborer, but symbolic of sexual restraint and chastity within a marriage. So, again there is kind of a moral code where sexuality is only for the purpose of procreation. It rejects the monk's loincloth, total celibacy, and the world's person's loose garment, that is the license. It affirms that productive work and family life are high spiritual path. Uberoi argues that before Sikhism, these roles were partitioned or split. You couldn't be a king and a monk at the same time. However, looking into the 5 symbols and the binary pairs, we see that there can be a coexistence of the household and ascetic, or a king and a monk. He concludes that these pairs make the Sikh all of a piece. The 5 Ks together signify total human emancipation. Now, when we look into the way in which the symbols are part of the Sikh's identity, we need to also understand that how do a sociologist study these personal beliefs and symbols accepted by a community. And therefore, he talks about the task of the sociologist. He positioned himself as a linguist of culture. Uberoi was just not asking what does a Sikh believe. He was asking how does the system of Sikhism construct a specific type of human being. By sticking to explicitly formulated rules of method, He aims to move past the superficial and find the structural coherence that keeps the Sikh Panth distinct and unified across century. So, if we look into how he has studied this, we see he makes reference to the Chinese pigtail. Uberoi argues that while hair has a natural association with power or virility, its specific meaning is entirely dependent on the political and social construct. He uses the Chinese pigtail or queue as a masterclass in how a single physical attribute can shift through three distinct phases of meaning. And here we will kind of map out the change in the meaning or the way in which hair has been conceptualized in different era or different period. So the first period was 1644, which is Manchu conquest, where the physical state was forced pigtail, and the symbolic meaning was of subjection, a brand of the conquered. Then we move to the middle Qing dynasty, where the physical form was standard pigtail and the symbolic meaning was honor and status, accepted as the Mandarin norm. The third stage was mid 19th century Taiping, where the physical form was long unshorn hair and the symbolic meaning of the long unshorn hair was rebellion, reclaiming native identity by growing it all out. By early 20th century, that is Yat-sen, the physical form was short and cropped hair, and this symbolized revolution. So, if you were going against the norm of the long hair and you're cutting short your hair, implying modernization and discarding the past entirely. So, basically when he is talking about the symbols, he is kind of talking about the ambivalence of hair. In Sikhism, hair is considered as a sacred or tabooed object, meaning it can represent two polar opposites depending on how it is handled. When it can be considered as positive, sacred and virile, as seen in the story of the Samson or the Achaeans, where long hair is literally reservoir of strength and divine favor. The second meaning could be negative, that is unclean and abandoned. When unkept or wild, hair can represent a person who has abandoned society, like a forest dwelling ascetic or someone who is dangerous. So, again the norm is kind of a clean, kept, well maintained hair, and if it is not, then it is pointing out at the deviant. Either you have do not have the normal everyday life, or you have kind of taken a path of something that you can become dangerous for the society. Here he gives us the example from the Brahmin, and here among the Brahmin the hair is considered as dignity. This reference to the institute of Manu is particularly sharp. For a Brahmin, shaving the head was considered equivalent to a death sentence for other caste. This proves the author's point. The hair isn't just protein, it is a legal and a social personhood. To remove it is to kill the individual's social standing without actually shedding blood. He is basically using the structural technique of inversion to understand the significance of the five symbols in Sikhism. He argues that to understand what the Sikh initiation is, you have to look at what it was reacting against. In the Punjab of 15th and 17th century, the most powerful alternative to a standard worldly life was sannyas, that is Hindu renunciation. But JPS Uberoi suggests that Guru Gobind Singh didn't just create a new ritual, he created a structural inversion of the sannyasi rite. And here we see the two sides of initiation. Basically, there are two movements. First is the investiture, that is the plus, where you look into the positive side of receiving new symbols, right, and a new identity. So, any individual who undergoes the initiation ceremony would be on the positive side of receiving, And the second meaning is diversitude, that is the minus, stripping away the old self, family ties and caste. So, you are going to take a new identity, so you are going to give up your previous identity. So, in the monastery, the minus, which is the renunciation, is the main event. In the Khalsa, both are present, but they are designed or to mirror and flip the sannyasi model. So, basically when we look into the structural inverses, that is the Sikh versus the sannyasi, his argument is that the Sikh case or the unsown hair is a direct anatonym of the sannyasi's treatment of hair. So, medieval India symbolic language, there were three ways to handle hair, each representing a special social grammar. One was the worldly householder. He would periodically shorn and trimmed hair, and the symbolic meaning was subject to rules and norms. The second was the sannyasi or the renunciation, who had shaven, meted jat, and the symbol was rejection of the world, social death. The third was the Sikh or the Khalsa, and they had unsown hair, the case, but along with the case, they also had a comb. So, it is kind of a combination of the household and the sannyasi, and rejects the ascetic flight and the worldly person's savings. So, by looking into the way in which he gives us a structural understanding of the meaning of 5 Ks in Sikh and helps us to understand Sikhism as a form of religious life. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.